The New York Mets are back. After going on an improbable NLCS run in what their president of baseball operations referred to as a transitional year, the New York Mets are now back as one of the bigger contenders in baseball. The Mets saw their window of playoff success ahead of them, and they went and attacked it, going after one of the biggest free agent signings in Major League Baseball history, in Juan Soto. A team with one of the more loaded lineups in the game, a solid crop of starters, and a pretty good back end of the bullpen. The Mets have the star power to compete for the World Series this year. If you enjoy this type of content, please subscribe to the channel. Just a few more of these to get out before opening day on Thursday. Let's get into a deep dive on the 2025 New York Mets organization. I'll get started here with some team ranks. These are all going to be completely objective. My rankings formula are going to be in the description of this video. The Mets had the 12th ranked Major League roster last year, led by a 9th ranked Major League lineup. The rotation and bullpen alongside the defense all around the middle in baseball, but the lineup is definitely the strength of this team. And a farm system that's very good. It comes in at the top 10th using my rankings. The minor league hitters are very solid. There's a bunch of guys that are going to contribute to this major league roster as soon as opening day. One of the better ran organizations in baseball since David Stearns has taken over, and a really solid group of prospects left behind from the past regime. And we'll go into this Mets brain trust right away. Carlos Mendoza, in his second season as the Mets manager, last season being his first, did a very solid job with this team. Coming over from the New York Yankees, I believe a very good manager here for the Mets. And David Stearns, as someone who grew up in Wisconsin watching a lot of baseball games, I know a lot about David Stearns and how he runs an organization. I think he's one of the brightest minds in all of baseball. He has done such a great job coming over to New York and really set up the future of this organization very well. Last season, 89-73, third in the National League East, 6th in the National League. They are a big time spender, $336 million on that 2024 payroll. Just about the same here in 2025, projected to be $332 million. The projections very much like the Mets this year, 91-71 by PECOTA. Second in the National League East, just behind the Phillies, and third in the National League. Their 2025 playoff odds are 83.2%. Unfortunately, due to some of the free agent signings that they've made, they do only have one top 100 draft pick. But man, when you can get Juan Soto, who cares? Your top contract is Juan Soto here at $51 million on one of the biggest free agent deals of all time. Francisco Lindor, second here at $34 million. That contract is looking more and more like a bargain as the days go by. And then Pete Alonso, re-signing with the Mets after a long offseason of not a lot going on. He's making $27 million in average annual salary this season. They made the playoffs last year, sneaking into that wild card spot, sadly beating the Brewers in the first round, playing very good in their second round series against the Phillies, and then just falling short to the Dodgers in the NLCS. Their park factor, which is a number that just shows how much of a pitcher's or hitter's park you play in, is 97. League average is 100. So Citi Field is going to be the 8th biggest pitching park in all of baseball. Not a lot of offense here, not a big time offensive run environment. But with this lineup, I promise you there'll still be a lot of runs scored. In terms of their organization success, their AAA Syracuse Mets roster did very solid last year, 78-71. Binghamton just over 500 at 69-67. The Brooklyn Cyclones at 65-67, and then the St. Lucie Mets 45-84 last season. In terms of season storylines, the biggest one for me is rotation depth. That's something that's already being tested, as we've seen Sean Manaea and Frankie Montas go down with injuries so far. It is a bit of a question at the back end. I do believe in some of their starters. We'll get into them more as we go on, but I think it will be a question for them over the season. One of the biggest storylines in the entire league, Juan Soto is finally in Queens. It has been rumored for the past few years, and it finally happened. They're getting a Hall of Fame level player at just 26 years old from free agency. Soto's offense is going to do so much for this lineup, and it is going to be such a positive to have him here. And then early injuries is another one. I mentioned the Montas and Manaea injuries already. Francisco Alvarez is going to be down for a while to start this season as well. Ronnie Mauricio still injured from last season, a prospect that played a bit last year, but definitely their depth is going to have to play a key role on this roster, specifically for the first few weeks of the season, as guys like Manaea, Montas, and Francisco Alvarez all come back from these injuries. In terms of offseason additions and subtractions, pretty big on both sides for the Mets. I'll start off by saying the Mets brought in a ton of guys on minor league deals that we will most likely see on the roster at some point during the season. I just went with Major League offseason additions and subtractions from last season. We'll go into Juan Soto right away. You got to talk about it. 15 years, $765 million. One of the best hitters in the league, the best at plate discipline in the entire league, projected over 6 WAR this season. Jose Siri brought in a trade this offseason an incredible defender in center field, projected just over 1.5 WAR in that outfield as well. And then Clay Holmes, the former closer of the New York Yankees, brought over to be the opening day starter for this Mets team. Really excited for what he can do as a starter. I'm going to be really happy to get into the breakdown on Holmes. Frankie Montas on a 2-year, $34 million deal. I mentioned he's injured to start the season. AJ Minter also hurt, but he should be ready for opening day. And then Griffin Canning, a big-time spring training guy, but really tough results last season. Brought over in a trade with Atlanta from the Angels. And then in terms of subtractions, there's a lot. Jose Iglesias, Harrison Bader, JD Martinez, all from this offense are going to be gone after pretty solid seasons for all of them. And then Luis Severino, a pretty big one. Jose Quintana brought a lot of innings last season. Down the stretch, Adam Ottavino, Brooks Raley, and Phil Maton all gone from this bullpen as well. Before I go into specifics on this lineup, I'll go over weighted runs created plus really quickly. That's just a statistic that's going to measure overall offensive productivity. Any number above or below 100, the league average, is going to be the percent better or worse that you were compared to league average offensively in that season. So for example, we'll get started with Francisco Lindor. He'll be projected to be 24% better than league average as a hitter last year, and he's one of the best shortstops in all of baseball. In one of the most loaded positions in the game right now, the Mets have one of the top guys, projected 28 homers, 23 steals, just under 6 WAR next season. Juan Soto, another guy at a super loaded position in baseball in right field, one of the top guys there, projected to be almost 70% better than league average, 35 homers and over 6 WAR. Pete Alonso back to be the first baseman of this team. A bit of a down year last year, but really got it going in the playoffs for a bit. He's projected 35 homers at just under 3 WAR next year. Brandon Nimmo also projected just under 3 WAR next year, 18% better than league average. Mark Vientos, a big time breakout season for him. One of the 2 guys under 3 years of service time in this lineup. Projected to have a big season at third base, 3.6 WAR and 33 homers. Jesse Winker, after a couple tough seasons in a row, came to the Mets last year and really stepped it up in the second half after a trade from Washington. Projected to be 16% better than league average next year. Jose Siri, more of a defender than anything in this lineup, but he can give you some solid stats in terms of pop. 17 homers and 14 stolen bases on the projections. Brett Baty, currently slotted in to be the second baseman against right-handed pitching. A longtime third baseman that's played very good in spring and defensively looks pretty solid at second. Luis Torrens, the catcher for now. I will go over Fernando Alvarez though when we go to the catcher breakdowns. Should give you close to league average hitting from the catcher position. And then on the bench for now, Hayden Senger is going to be the backup catcher on this roster. Shout out to my Haydens out there. Luisangel Acuna, a very solid player, could also play second base for this team. Starling Marte and Tyrone Taylor, 2 very solid outfielders, although not as good offensively. Taylor, a very good defender, and just one of the most loaded lineups in the game. 5 guys projected to be top 10 at their position in WAR next year. A projected rotation that I mentioned is already dealing with some injuries. I'm going to talk about Frankie Montas really quick because I didn't do a full breakdown on him. Currently dealing with a lat strain and won't be throwing for another 4 or so weeks, but brought in on the free agent deal, and he should give some solid innings. Was really good for Milwaukee down the stretch last year and made a playoff start. Clay Holmes is going to be the one in this rotation. He'll be your opening day starter, and he has looked incredible in spring. I mentioned he was the closer for the Yankees for a long time. Tylor Megill has had some solid seasons in the past, projected just over a 4 ERA next year. Griffin Canning, I mentioned a very good spring training from him. His projections are not very good because of what he gave last season. David Peterson, a very good year last year in terms of ERA. Finally going to get the opportunity to start. And then Kodai Senga might be the best pitcher in this entire rotation. Really like what I've seen metrically out of Senga in his career. He's projected just under 2.5 WAR. Jose Arena and then Brandon Sproat might also come up to give some innings to this rotation this year. And then we'll get into this Mets bullpen. Edwin Diaz, been the closer here for a while now, came over from Seattle in a trade a few years ago, projected under a 3 ERA, 35.2% strikeout rate. AJ Minter, I mentioned, has been dealing with an injury, but he should be ready for opening day here from Atlanta. Jose Butto, really solid numbers from him last year, projected a 3.7 ERA. Reed Garrett, probably my favorite guy in this pen, just under a 3.6, 27.3% on the strikeout rate. Ryan Stanek was pretty solid down the stretch for the Mets last year, but not great overall season numbers. Danny Young, the only lefty in this bullpen currently. Max Kranick, a guy who hasn't pitched in the majors since 2022, but did pitch really well in the minors for the Mets last year, is projected to make this roster. And then Paul Blackburn could give you some starts, but also could be a multi-inning guy out of this bullpen. I'll talk about a few other guys that could work into this pen when we get to that section of the video. Before I get into the player breakdowns, I'll go over some of the numbers on the screen here. Remember, weighted runs created plus, general offensive statistic, league average is 100. WOBA stands for weighted on base average, just a way of measuring how you get on base. It weighs everything differently, so a homer weighs more than a triple, which weighs more than a double, etc. League average for that stat is 310. All of the percentile rankings are going to be run values by Baseball Savant, so offensive, base running, and defensive run values. And then on the Savant card are going to be metrics for defense, base running, plate discipline, hard hit rates, and some expected stats. So we'll get started here with Francisco Alvarez. He will be the starting catcher on this team when he comes back, but he fractured his left hamate bone and isn't expected back for the team until late April. A guy that is very solid defensively last year. The framing was very good for him. Really solid pop time. A big time minor league hitter in terms of his power and always had really good numbers, but has yet to really get it going to that level in the majors. A big time prospect in Alvarez. Solid walk rates out of him. He does struggle a bit with the strikeouts. The bat speed is very good. The hard hit rate is all right. The rest of the stats on the page just not very good for him last season. A bit of a mixed bag for Alvarez in the majors throughout his entire career. A 710 OPS last year, a 721 in 23, and a 786 in 14 plate appearances in 2022. Did take a pretty sizable step back in a lot of the hard hit rates last season, and really struggled against right-handed pitching last year, which really hasn't been an issue for him in the past, but just a 680 OPS against them last year. As I mentioned though, a really big prospect for the Mets. Incredible minor league stats, 907 OPS and 61 homers in just 263 games down there. For Alvarez, he's really struggled against breaking and off-speed pitches so far since he's been up in the majors, but I do think there's a lot of potential here in Alvarez, a guy that's been a great hitter in the minor leagues and one that I think will hit his stride sooner rather than later against major league pitching. Luis Torrens is going to be the catcher to start the season, and he had a pretty solid year in terms of a lot of metrics last season. Was hitting the ball very hard throughout a majority of the year. The whiff rates and chase rates well above average when compared to other hitters in the league. Big time arm behind the plate and great pop time for Torrens. That's a big plus for him. A lot of the metrics for Torrens were actually a lot better than the numbers that he got last season. The expected WOBA a lot higher than that WOBA. I think I would expect Luis Torrens to be a positive at the plate for the Mets until Alvarez can come back. I will also mention with Francisco Alvarez, a big time first half for him last year. The second half was really tough, a 594 OPS and not very good playoff numbers, but I do think there's just a lot of really good signs for this catching group. I think this should be a positive part of this roster. Pete Alonso, a guy that was in my nightmares for about 2 months as a Brewers fan, but a really solid hitter at first base. Big time power guy, 34 homers last year. A guy that's going to play almost every single day, 162 games. Even in a down year for Pete Alonso, pretty good offensively. 85th percentile in offensive run value. The bat speed's great there for him, so all of the hard hit rates are going to be there. Really struggles defensively, just not going to bring you a lot of value there, and not much of a base runner at all either. Still overall a very valuable player just because of what he can bring you offensively, and I'll go into some of the stats here. A 788 OPS last season. The past 2 years before this, an 822 and an 870. A career 853 OPS guy with 46 and 40 homers both of those past 2 seasons. For him, it was really just the ball wasn't getting hit in the air as much. He was 14th percentile in the launch angle sweet spot percent, which is the amount of time you're hitting the ball between 8 and 32 degrees in the air. Alonso just wasn't doing that much last year. He also struck out a bit more, but the walk rate is better, so I think you can take that a little bit. I don't think it's something to be worried about. I think Alonso is going to be able to figure that out again, and even if this is his floor, if this is what he's going to be like moving forward, 34 homers at first base is still a pretty positive player. Pete Alonso, your first baseman here for the Mets, I would expect him to go back to the Alonso that we've seen in the past. So this is going to be a pretty interesting one for this lineup. Brett Baty currently slotted in at the second base position. I mentioned earlier in this video that he's more of a third baseman prototypically, but he has been playing very good there in spring training, and it sounds like he will be in the lineup here against right-handed pitching. A guy who has came up to the majors, really solid minor league numbers across the board for him, but has yet to find that success up here. Been worse than replacement level so far over his career, 17% worse than league average last year offensively, and not a ton there in terms of the metrics either. Took a pretty big step back in terms of some of the hard hit numbers, but the walk rate was a lot better last year, so he showed some growth in the plate discipline areas. Gotta talk about the spring training from this year. 59 plate appearances, a 353 average, 745 slugging, 441 on base, 4 homers in those 59 plate appearances. So he really has been hitting the ball a lot harder. The bat speed is up a bit as well, so he looks really good in spring right now. Defensively, it's been up and down for him in his career at third base. 2 outs above average last year, but -4 the year before. Not necessarily sure what to expect from him at second base, but a guy with a career 889 OPS in the minors, last season an 853 and 16 homers in 62 games. I think he can be successful at the major league level. Big time breakout star of the 2024 season in Mark Vientos here, 27 homers last year, 33% better than league average. You can see why. All of the hard hit numbers are very good for him. Vientos was in the 87th percentile of offensive run value last year, and he absolutely crushes left-handed pitching. Just 25 years old, a guy that's been very solid coming up through this system and really put it together last year. Doesn't bring a ton defensively or base running and will strike out a decent amount. The walk rate is at about a league average spot, but just a big time turnaround in almost every area from Vientos last year. A 620 OPS in 233 plate appearances the year before. All of the metrics went way up for him. He stopped swinging the bat so hard, which was a really big thing for him. 2 miles an hour down with the bat speed, but all of the hard hit rate numbers got way better. Was great in the playoffs last year. A 998 OPS in 58 plate appearances with 5 homers. I can't say I'm without some concern on the strikeout numbers. Striking out almost 30% of the time. You really do have to hit the ball hard every time you're making contact. If he can fix that just a little bit, I would feel a lot better about him, but still, Mark Vientos, a very good season last year. Love the slugging, love the pop in his bat. A very good third baseman here, 25 years old. Can you believe that people were talking about the Francisco Lindor contract as one of the worst in baseball just a few seasons ago? Lindor does everything well on the baseball diamond. 96th percentile in defense, 92nd in offense, just about 90th in base running. A switch hitting shortstop that plays the position great. 37% better than league average offensively last year. 33 homers, 29 stolen bases. Almost 7 WAR per 162 the last 3 years. Crushes the baseball. The K rate is well above average. Lindor is one of the best players in the entire league. Only 31 years old. The Mets have him signed long term. The last 3 seasons for Lindor, 844, 806, and 788 OPS. So last year was his best year out of the last few. A guy who's 99th percentile and outs above average at shortstop. Notoriously a bit of a slow starter. Last year, 783 OPS in the first half, which is still really good, but a 942 in the second half. An 877 OPS in the playoffs last year. 2 pretty big homers for Lindor. Just one of the better players at his position in the game and a big time positive for this Mets lineup. In left field, a longtime Met in Brandon Nimmo. The past couple of years been playing a lot more left. I think that's where he's going to be long term. 4.4 WAR per 162, so a very valuable player the past 3 years. 9% better than league average last year. Offensively, 23 homers and 15 steals, out there for 161 games. A big time on base guy. That walk rate is going to be way up there every year, and a really solid base runner, 85th percentile in that category. A guy who underperformed a lot of the expected stats last year as well. The WOBA batting average and expected slugging all lower than their expected numbers. Not going to bring you a ton of value defensively at this point in his career, but still a really solid arm, and he can go out and get it there in the outfield with that speed. Mets got him here on a long-term deal, and he did take a pretty big step back in terms of results last year. 829 OPS, a 363 on base base in 2023, just a 327 on base last year and a 726 OPS, but not too many of the metrics changed for Nimmo. He was striking out a bit more and he wasn't squaring up the ball as much, but outside of that, a lot of the same. I think we're going to see a bit of a positive regression to the mean for Brandon Nimmo next year. The stats really tanked against right-handed pitching last season, and I don't think that's something that will continue to happen for him. I think we'll see a little bit of the same 2023 and 2022 Brandon Nimmo more in 2025. Jose Siri here from Tampa Bay to play center field for the Mets, 3.0 WAR per 162, so he does a lot of things, but just not a lot offensively last season. 99th percentile in range in center field, one of the better arms in the game and one of the fastest players in baseball. So a big floor for Jose Siri. The issue with him is he just doesn't make a lot of contact with pitches. The whiff rates, the chase rates, and the strikeout rates are all amongst the lowest percentile values in baseball. Doesn't walk very much either. The plate discipline for him is just really not good. But he can barrel the ball up. That's really been a strength of his in the past. A guy that has really always struggled to make contact at the plate in his career. 2023, he did have a 761 OPS, but a lot of the metrics were very similar for him. He can definitely run into a home run ball here and there. Really good defensively in center field. He's going to be able to cover up a lot of the issues in this outfield defensively, and I believe that's why the Mets brought him in to play center. Juan Soto, baby. 100th percentile in offensive run value last season, 80% better than league average, 41 homers, 100th percentile in expected WOBA and expected batting average, 99 or 98th percentile in expected slugging, average exit velocity, barrel rate, hard hit rate, chase rate, and then 100th percentile in walk rate. Juan Soto does everything at the plate. The Mets got him this offseason. I mentioned $765 million he signed here through 2040, and for good reason. One of the best hitters of all time in a lot of these categories. With that being said, the defense and base running is not great, so he's going to have to continue to be one of the better hitters in the league to give the WAR that he's been giving the past few years. The defense, although it's not as bad as it has been in the past, isn't very good. 13th percentile in range out there. He does have a solid arm. The arm value is really good for him, but that's all the bad I can say about Juan Soto, because I want to talk about this offense more. 41 homers last year, 35 the year before, and 27 the year before that. His on-base percentage in his career is .421, a career OPS of .953, already 201 homers. He's only 26 years old. He went nuts in the playoffs last year for the Yankees, really carrying the offense in the playoffs. A 1.102 OPS, 4 homers, and 14 walks compared to 9 strikeouts. Soto does everything, man. One of the best offensive players that we've ever seen in the league, and a surefire Hall of Famer if he continues to do this. And then Jesse Winker here at DH, 31 years old, a guy that hits right-handed pitching very well, 18% better than league average offensively, 14 homers for him last year. Not a guy who hits the ball as hard as he used to, but the walk rate is so good for him. He gets on base at a very solid clip, 360 last year. 2 really tough seasons before this for Jesse Winker, kind of going between Milwaukee, Seattle, and then a bit of a start in Washington last year. But a 567 and a 688 OPS those 2 years. A guy that had formerly been an all-star for the Reds and a big-time hitter, really just struggled the past 2 seasons. Before 2024, really going to be a DH only, first percentile in range, 11 outs below average last year. In the playoffs for Winker, he did really get it going though. 32 plate appearances, a 1.167 OPS. So I think you can definitely be excited about Jesse Winker here against right-handed pitching in this lineup. And then 3 guys on this bench that I do expect to play a lot. Luisangel Acuna, I'm really surprised didn't work himself into the second base job right away. But if they're doing it as a platoon with him and Baty, I do definitely understand it. 66% better than league average, only 14 games in the majors last year, but he was really good down the stretch for the Mets. Starling Marte, an outfielder, he has declined a bit steadily every single year the past few seasons, but 36 years old and still above league average as a hitter. Not going to bring you a ton of value defensively, but Tyrone Taylor will do that. 98 weighted runs created plus last year, but a real solid defender, can play center, can play left, can play right, can do a lot of things for this team and really helps the outfield versatility. With that being said, I'll get into the pitching section of this video. We'll get started here with Clay Holmes. I'll go over some of the numbers really quickly. On the right side of the screen in percentiles are going to be run value again. So pitching, fastball, breaking, and then off speed if you have off speed pitches. On the card, FIP stands for fielding independent pitching. Think about it as a predictor of ERA over a big sample. So we would have expected Clay Holmes' ERA to be closer to 3.02 last year. And then Stuff Plus and Location Plus on the card, two models built by Eno Saris at Fangraphs that does a really good job at showing how good a pitcher's stuff is compared to league average, and their location works the exact same as weighted runs created plus. League average is going to be 100 for those stats. And let's talk Clay Holmes, the opening day starter for this team, the former closer of the New York Yankees, brought over as a starting pitcher. I absolutely love it. His numbers are great. I think he works to be a starting pitcher very well. That ground ball percentile, 64.6% of the time he gives up batted balls, they're on the ground. That's 100th percentile in all of baseball. Pretty solid whiff numbers. Doesn't give up a lot of hard contact. I think he can really work this into being a successful starting pitcher. A .93 ERA for Holmes in 19.1 spring training innings with 23 strikeouts. Clay added a few more pitches to his arsenal. In his last spring training start, he was sinker, sweeper, slider, changeup, cutter, and four-seam fastball. So he's really developing as a starter. He's going to throw a lot of different pitches this year. A lot of success in the majors for Holmes, especially since he came over to the Yankees. Really excited to see what a full season of starting pitcher Clay Holmes looks like. Currently slotted in to make the second start of the year is Tylor Megill. Okay stats last year, a 4.04 ERA, but the FIP was a lot better. The strikeout numbers for him, always really solid, 79th percentile in K rate last year. Just gave up too much hard contact, and that led to the ERA being inflated. Always pretty good stuff for Megill, above league average, just didn't locate his pitches. A guy who's above average with his fastballs, and he's going to throw 7 pitches here. The four-seamer, cutter, slider, sinker, curveball, splitter, sweeper, and changeup, although the sweeper and changeup are 2% and 1% respectively. A guy that had initial success when he came up, but the last 3 seasons have been a bit of a mixed bag for him. I mentioned the 4.04 ERA last year, a 4.7 the year before, and a 5.13 in 2022. Completely added the cutter to his arsenal last season, and I think that really helped with some of the results. The cutter itself not being as good of a pitch, a 4.01 WOBA against that pitch, but some of the other pitches really benefited. The splitter was very good for him last year, and the slider and sinker, both big time pitches. I hope he throws those more next year because he's got some stuff here. But Tylor Megill, the number 2, a bit of a mixed bag so far in his career. Griffin Canning, I mentioned a very big spring training, not very good numbers though last season, 5.19 ERA, a 5.26 FIP. None of the metrics really liked him at all, but a big time off speed pitch guy. When he gets that changeup going, man, he is very solid. 88th percentile in off-speed run value last season. A guy who had a better year in 2023, a 4.32 ERA, but still not a ton of success there for him. This spring training, a 1.88 ERA in 14.1 innings, so really a small sample, but he has been very good. Not gonna say that that's really gonna make me super excited for the season just because of what I've seen from Canning the past couple years, but he does look like a bit of a rejuvenated pitcher. I could see some success coming from him this season. David Peterson, the lefty starting in this group on opening day, a 2.90 ERA for him last year. The FIP was a bit bigger. The expected numbers didn't like him as much, but definitely did some very good things. The fastballs for him are very good. The four-seam, cutter, and sinker all work together to give him an 81st percentile run value on those fastballs. Located his pitches at about a league average rate. The stuff isn't great for him. I'm not really sure where I'm at with David Peterson. He's had some very good numbers and can get ground balls, but doesn't strike out a ton of guys, and the expected numbers don't love him very much. Been swinging between the rotation and the bullpen a bit the past couple of years. 2023 was a really tough year for him, a 5.03 ERA. A lot of the metrics very similar for him though. Started using that sinker a bit more, and I think that did lead to some more success. He got a lot more ground balls last season. I think David Peterson is a solid pitcher. I don't know if he's a 2.90 ERA guy, but anyone who can give innings to this rotation is going to be a positive for the organization, and I think David Peterson could have a pretty solid season. Kodai Senga currently slotted in as the 5. I really think the best starter here, a 2.98 ERA in 2023, missed most of last season with an injury, but did come back for one start in the regular season and pitched a bit in the playoffs, albeit not to great results, a 12.60 ERA in just 5 innings. innings. The forkball is really his pitch. That's where he's going to get a lot of his value, 93rd percentile in off-speed run value that season. But his fastball's really played up. I think those pitches play off each other very well. The four seam and cutter are both pretty solid pitches for him. Did have a bit of a walk issue in 2023, 15th percentile in walk rate, but did a lot of other things really well. I'm really excited for another full year of Kodai Senga. Love watching that ghost fork in action. And then Sean Manaea going to be back here this season after a really solid year with the Mets. Did get injured in spring training though, will likely be back in mid-April. Switched up his arm angle last season, started throwing for more of a Chris Sale-like 3/4 angle, and that really helped him out. Not league average in stuff or location anymore, but I think that arm angle really allows his pitches to play up. The fastballs were awesome last year. The four-seam sinker and cutter combined for a 98th percentile fastball, and overall a 93rd percentile pitcher. Really struggled the past 2 seasons before 2024, but switched up his pitch usage a lot, started throwing the four-seamer a lot more, the sweeper more, and that arm angle I mentioned down 6 degrees really helped him be a solid pitcher last year. Gave some big-time starts for the Mets last season, 4 postseason starts for Manaea as well. Here on a 3-year, $75 million deal, I'll expect him to be a pretty solid pitcher throughout those 3 seasons. That'll bring us into this bullpen, and we'll get started with Edwin Diaz. Last season, a 3.52 ERA, a 3.02 FIP, so a pretty big step back in terms of numbers for him, but he still did strike out about 40% of the guys that he faced. Only a four-seam slider guy, a guy with really good stuff on those pitches though. Been one of the better closers in baseball the past few seasons. With the Mets, has had some really solid numbers after he came over and initially struggled. A bit of a scary sign for him though, the fastball velo is down a pretty significant amount since his really good 2023 season. Not sure what to make of that for now, but we'll hopefully see a good season out of Diaz this year. AJ Minter over from the Atlanta Braves, a 2.62 ERA, the FIP a lot higher last season, was giving up some hard contact, but the stuff and location are both pretty solid for him. 26% strikeout rate, did walk a decent amount at 8.2, a four-seam cutter change guy, and then Jose Butto, really a breakout year for him last year, 74 innings, a 2.55 ERA. The stuff and location for him aren't great. The FIP was pretty high comparatively to his ERA, but Butto got a lot of strikeouts last season. The whiff rate is in the 90th percentile in baseball, and that expected batting average in the 95th percentile of all pitchers. He's given the Mets some very good innings over the past couple seasons, and I think he'll continue to do that in 2025. Into the rest of this bullpen, we'll start with Reed Garrett, a very good season from him last year, a big-time strikeout guy, 33.6% of the time. Will walk a lot of guys though, 12.1% walk rate for him. Doesn't give up much hard contact at all though. The hard hit numbers against his pitches are all very solid. A really good splitter from him. He'll throw a cutter, a sweeper, a four seam, and a sinker. So really just the splitter, sweeper, and then 3 fastballs. Ryan Stanek had a tough year for the Mets in the regular season last year. 55.1 innings, a 4.88 ERA. The FIP is a bit lower. Another guy who struggled with some walk issues, but some really good metrics. The expected batting average and ERA are both pretty good. Got a lot of strikeouts, a lot of whiffs on his pitches, and actually gave some pretty important innings in the playoffs for the Mets. 8 innings of 3.38 ERA. I think I'm expecting a better season out of Ryan Stanek next year. Danny Young here as the lefty in the bullpen, a 4.54 ERA, but the FIP was a lot better. Big time strikeout guy again, just a sweeper and sinker pitcher. Big time on the ground ball rate for him, up there at 53.3% of the time. Strikes out a lot of batters, and that whiff rate is pretty solid at 30.7%. Max Kranick, an interesting one, pitched in AAA last season and was pretty solid, a 3.82 ERA, having a pretty good spring, and it sounds like he's gonna make this roster. Pitched in the majors a bit before, never really had a ton of success, but some really good metrics when he was up in 2022. Those numbers in the hard hit categories are all really good. 12.1 innings this spring, a 1.46 ERA, so I think that's the reason he made it. 15 strikeouts and 1 walk. And then Paul Blackburn, formerly of the Oakland A's, no longer the Oakland A's. Please don't shoot me, Rob Manfred. But a guy who's had some success in the past, never super good numbers, but a guy that throws a lot of pitches. I think can give a lot of pretty solid innings out of this bullpen as more of a multi-inning guy and can start some games for the Mets if needed. Pretty solid at limiting hard contact, just not a guy that gets a ton of strikeouts and is just giving up too many barrels. A couple other guys in this bullpen that I want to mention that aren't going to make the opening day roster, it sounds sounds like. Dedanel Nunez, a really good sample last year. Huascar Brazaban came over from the Marlins. A ton of these minor league NRI guys. Genesis Cabrera, Chris Davinsky, Oliver Ortega, Kevin Hergen might give you some innings. There's a lot of guys here that can really help out this bullpen at some point in the season. I'll expect to see a couple of those during the season. Adbert Alzolay also over from the Cubs. But there are definitely reinforcements in this bullpen if a guy falters here and there. That'll get us into the prospects here for the Mets, and we'll get started with Jet Williams, number 58 in the top 100, but a guy that has fallen a bit in recent years. Struggled a bit offensively last season, 97 weighted runs created plus, got up to AAA, 21 years old though, and a 55 Baseball America grade. Missed a portion of last season with a broken hand, a former 14th overall pick out of high school by the Mets in 2022, and had a really good 2023 season, a .425 on base percentage that year and 13 homers, stole 45 bases, just did a lot of things and really struggled last year dealing with that injury. But he definitely had a better end to the season. His batted ball quality got a lot better over the year. It has some really solid tools. I'm hopeful for what Jet Williams can do in the future, but a really tough 2024 for him. Brandon Sproat, the number 2 prospect here, a guy that might end up making a couple starts in the majors this season. Pitched at Florida for 4 years, already 24 years old. A second round pick in 2023, a guy that the Mets drafted twice, once out of high school and once out of college. Really throws hard. One of the higher average velocities on his fastball of any starter in the minor leagues, and some pretty good stuff to go along with that. Some pretty good numbers at high A and double A last year, but did really struggle when he got up to triple A. So I think we're going to have to see a bit more success in that area before he's ready to go in the major leagues, but a plus fastball, plus slider, and plus changeup could definitely be a big time stuff pitcher in the majors, and has the potential to be a middle of the rotation guy. And then Jesus Baez, I think one of the more underranked guys in this entire Mets system, just because of the fact that he was injured last year midway through the season, and he was getting off to a really solid start, got up to high A as a 19-year-old last season, was having very good numbers. 92nd in the top 100, a guy that I think might shoot up those boards this season, really hits the ball hard, has really good hit and power tools, really has some of the tools of a very experienced hitter, pulls the ball a lot and really tracks it at the plate, really good plate discipline numbers. Really excited for Jesus Baez. He's definitely going to be one of my favorite prospects in the system and a guy to watch in 2025. We'll go into these notable infield prospects here, and we'll get started with Ronnie Mauricio, a long-time prospect in this Mets system. Some really good tools for him, really solid in the power areas. The only question for him is the hit tool. Unfortunately, missed the entirety of the 2024 season after tearing his ACL in the Dominican League in December. But some solid major league numbers when he was up in 2023, although the chase rate numbers were pretty tough. The hit tool I mentioned is a pretty big question for him. He might end up having to be at AAA for a significant portion of the season whenever he comes back, just because of the fact that he hasn't taken swings in a very long time against any pitching, but a big time switch hitting bat here in the infield, and a guy that I think will contribute to the major league roster this season. Ryan Clifford, a first base slash outfield guy who was acquired in the Justin Verlander trade at the 2023 trade deadline, a former 11th round pick that was signed for a $1.25 million signing bonus, so they really had to take him away from going to college. He had some pretty solid numbers in the minors over his career, a big 3 true outcomes guy. Over half his plate appearances last season ended with a walk, a strikeout, or a home run. Has 30 home run upside at the plate if he starts to make contact just a little bit more. The hit tool, another question for him, but a 60 grade power for him. I think Clifford could see the majors close to 2026 or 2027. Boston Barrow, a 20-year-old prospect signed away from UCLA in the 2023 draft, already got up to high A last season for 11 games. A pretty solid hit tool for him, really good in the fielding and arm categories. I think he's most likely going to be a defender at third base or second base. He could definitely be above average there, but I think if he is at shortstop, he could be a league average player. Definitely a very versatile prospect and a guy that's hit so far through the minor leagues. Elian Pena, the crown jewel of the Mets international signing period this offseason, some incredible tools on him. 50 hit, 55 power, 50 run, 50 field, and 60 arm. Already their number 9 prospect and a guy that I expect to get a lot of run in the DSL this year. And then Kevin Parada, a former first round pick, a guy that was really high on some of these lists, but really struggled in the minors. The prospect pedigree and the tool grades have deteriorated pretty badly over time, but he does have first round pedigree, a catcher, and a decent college bat. Not sure what happened to Kevin Parada, but he hasn't really been able to catch up to velocity in the minor leagues. We'll get into these outfielders and start with Carson Benj, a 21-year-old in A-ball, number 7 prospect, really good arm and solid tools across the board. The 19th overall pick in the draft last season. He played both ways at Oklahoma State in college, but it sounds like he's most likely going to be a long-term outfielder. Just barely had a sample in the minor leagues last year, got a little bit of run in A-ball, but did do pretty solid. 857 OPS down there, some really good tools for him. They compare him to Michael Conforto in the Baseball America article, and I think that is a pretty solid guy to be compared to here. Drew Gilbert, also part of the Justin Verlander trade in 2023. Pretty solid tools. That hit tool is really going to be his carrying one, but also a very good fielder in the outfield. Was dealing with a bit of a hamstring injury last year that hampered him in a couple ways. He should be healthy going into this season. I would expect him to compete for that center field spot long term with the Mets, but he really can play all 3 outfield spots. Nick Morabito, a former comp pick after Noah Syndergaard signed with the Angels, had some pretty good numbers in the minors. At high A last season, a .312 average and 59 stolen bases. Didn't strike out very often either, only 18.6%. Should be in double A this year, and I really expect a lot out of him. Christopher Suero, maybe a high riser in the system, a catcher slash outfielder, a guy that has a pretty solid hit and power tool, and a pretty good runner. I think he will end up being a long-term outfielder. A .361 on base percentage in 2024 and stole 20 bases, so a pretty high potential catcher slash outfielder in Christopher Suero. And then AJ Ewing, maybe not the most important Ewing in New York history, but a guy that can play outfield and second base. Ewing was the comp pick for when Jacob deGrom signed with the Rangers, so they're really getting a lot back here in terms of those comp picks. Pretty solid with a lot of the tools and a very good runner, can play a really good outfield, and I would expect him to be there long term. So another top 100 guy here at 99 in Nolan McLean, a .378 ERA with 116 strikeouts and 109.2 innings at Double-A last year. He was doing the Ohtani thing for a little bit, DHing and pitching, but in 2025 sounds like he's going to be a full-time pitcher. Very good grades on his pitches, just needs to develop that changeup a bit more, and I think he could end up being a top of the rotation guy long term. So Christian Scott made his major league debut last season, but unfortunately had Tommy John surgery in September and is going to be out for this entire season. A guy who had great numbers in AAA, a 26.2 strikeout to walk ratio, and a guy with some really solid pitches, all 3 of them above a 50 grade and really good control. Unfortunately, he won't be 27 until he returns to the mound, so pretty old for a guy that doesn't have any MLB stats under his belt really, but I think he can be a really good pitcher when he comes back. Jonah Tong, a Canadian who ended up being drafted by the Mets in the 7th round, tops out at 97 on that fastball, and it has a bit of a natural rise to it, a 60 grade on that pitch, really good curveball. The slider and changeup not as developed as the other pitches, but a big time deception pitcher. That fastball averaged more than 20 inches of induced vertical break. Will debut this season in the upper levels of the minor leagues. I'm excited to see what Tong does going forward. Blade Tidwell was entering the 2022 season as the top pitcher in the draft, but had a shoulder injury and missed the entire season that year. The Mets ended up getting him in the second draft. They went 25% over slot to sign him, and he's been one of the best pitchers in terms of strikeouts for the Mets since he came to the minor leagues. Already got up to AAA, a guy that's really rising through the system really quickly. I think a guy that can make an excellent reliever. 2 really good pitches in that fastball and the slider, and the changeup and cutter there to really throw hitters off. Should make his debut in the majors this season if he has a good start in AAA though. And then Dom Hamill, a big time pitch guy, 55 fastball, 40 curveball, 50 slider, 40 changeup, and 50 on the cutter. Definitely needs to work on his control a bit, really deals with some walk issues, but there's a lot there in terms of what he can be as a pitcher. I would expect him to make a major league debut here very soon, 25 years old already for Dom Hamill. I'll quickly go over a Baseball America projected 2028 lineup and rotation, and this one is really fun for the Mets. Alvarez, Vientos, Lindor, Nimmo, and Soto all here already with major league experience. Ronnie Mauricio also was up in the majors before he tore his ACL, and then you're just adding some of the best hitting prospects in the minor leagues to this group. Jet Williams, Carson Benj, and Jesus Baez gonna be up here. There's just so much to be excited about for the future of this Mets franchise. You love all of the names on this list here. Nimmo at 35, Lindor at 34, maybe a bit of a question mark. I don't think Lindor is going to age badly, though. I think the craziest thing out of this entire projected 2028 lineup, though, is Juan Soto isn't even going to be 30 years old yet. The ceiling for him as a Met is literally not a thing. He could have one of the best 6-7 year stretches in baseball history coming up. I'm so excited for what Juan Soto is going to do here. And then we'll go into this rotation. Kodai Senga, they have as the long-term one starter. I do really like that because I'm a big fan of Kodai Senga, but he will be 35 years old in 2028. Brandon Sproat, they have developing into a 2. It definitely could be there, but we need to see a little bit more in terms of the number. Peterson, they have as the 3 starter. Nolan McLean as the 4. Christian Scott after Tommy John coming back and being the 5. And then Edwin Diaz, they have as the closer. So 5 solid pitchers here for the Mets as well. And I'll just go over some final thoughts really quickly on the Mets. I think this is definitely a World Series contending team. Not too many holes on this roster. This lineup can definitely carry a pitching staff as well. Love almost every position on this team. I'm a big fan of Francisco Alvarez, so when he comes back, I think he's going to have a good year. Soto, Lindor, Nimmo, Alonso, the top end talent is just crazy. The rotation might have some issues to start the season with Minaya and Montas being injured, but that's a place I could see the Mets adding somebody at the deadline. And I think there's just too many options in this bullpen for it to really be an issue. They have so many guys in that minor league system on NRIs that want to be on this roster. The Diaz thing is a bit concerning, though. It might be something that catches up to him at some point. That fastball velo is just down too much. But I think I'm going to have the Mets winning the NL East, or at least making the playoffs out of the NL East in my season predictions. This top end talent is just way too good for this team to not be all right in 2025. So that was a very fun one. Thank you guys so much for listening. This was a breakdown of the 2025 New York Mets organization.